Welcome to this Digital Clinical Safety Platform webinar. We're glad you can join us today, and I hope you'll find that discussions we have are interesting and informative. Let me introduce you to our team. I'm the chair, Michelle Durham, and the Clinical Safety Alliance, the Digital Clinical Safety Alliance, composes of Mark, Marcus, Grant and Joe, and we're pleased to welcome Dean, who has come along to give his view as a current practicing clinical safety officer on the software that we're developing. The current clinical safety documentation is a prototype, and there is a version of this in live, but it is not production ready yet, as it needs further development, refinement and testing. However, it is currently available if you want to try it for yourselves. We're holding this webinar partly because we're interested in how much support and engagement there is within the wider NHS community for this type of product. And we're also looking at how we could possibly get funding to progress this work. Currently, we are doing this as an act of love because of our belief that this is the way forward for clinical safety. I'd now like to hand you over to Mark Bailey, who is going to run through the current process, the Cookiecutter hazard logging, hazard types, and the digital clinical safety platform. So over to you, Mark.
Michelle, thank you very much for that. And yes, hopefully you're all here to hear about the digital clinical safety platform. Here is a snapshot of what the end product looks like, showing you some standard documentation for your hazard logging and your whole safety documentation. And then we're going to talk about how you can get some hazards in terms of hazard logging into your code as well in this view here. Now, quick overview, and this will be sort of standard stuff for everyone in clinical safety practice. What are we doing at the moment and what kind of standards do we have? So the actual clinical standards, many of them in different countries that have their own. Ones you may be familiar with are the IEC 62304, which is a computer standard, computer software standard. And then there's the England's DCB0129 and 160 for manufacturing and implementation of digital systems for healthcare purposes. And for those that are practicing, and I've been involved with this myself as well, and Dean, who's a full-time clinical safety officer, very much gets involved with documenting these things using different types of software that's out there. So for example, on NHS Digital, which is now NHS England's website, you've got the Word documents, so the clinical risk management system template. You've got spreadsheets, for example, the DCB0129 compliance assessment and the hazard logs from NHS England. And people also use Kanban boards for documenting where they are in the process of mapping and documenting the safety, clinical safety of a process and a project. There's process mapping, so you may all be familiar with Microsoft Visio. There's also mockups and many, many more of these things. And also there's other different homegrown systems. And I've seen through a few with different clinical safety companies out there. So that's what people are currently doing at the moment. But what we've been doing with the Digital Clinical Safety Alliance is looking at what has been done, what is being done, and what sort of future views on clinical safety practice has been started and what we could work upon and build upon as well. So for those of you that are on Discourse from the Digital Health Limited, you might have seen Marcus Bohr, who couldn't be with us unfortunately today. A lot of his work that he's done on what he's called the Cookiecutter DCB0129, and the link to the GitHub repository for anyone that's interested to look at the underlying code or just the documentation of this program itself to see what it is capable of. You can see it here. I will be sharing the slides on the Let's Do Digital website afterwards, so you can actually just highlight that link and look at it yourself if you wish to. So created by Marcus Bohr, and it was used during the clinical safety documentation of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health College when they were building the Digital Growth Charts API. There was Marcus and a small team that were working on that, and they wanted to streamline and improve the processes around clinical safety with digital systems. And at its backbone, it stores the documentation on GitHub. So a few of you will probably know what that is, but for those that don't, GitHub is basically uses Git, which is a version control system at its core. That's all it is, to store your documentation on a website called github.com. Simple as that. So it's a version control on a website, and you can have it private or public. So you can have your documentation along with your code. We'll talk about that. Stored somewhere privately or for anyone to look at if you wish. And it uses a Markdown template. So Markdown is just a very nice, simplistic way of writing web pages, HTML pages. You write simple text, and a program looks at that and turns it into a website. But it's just much easier for the human to write with Markdown. And the Cookiecutter DCB0129 is based on a Cookiecutter library, which basically takes a template with placeholders, and the program allows you to fill in those placeholders whatever values you like. So you can have, the clinical safety officer's name in hundreds of different places. You don't have to search for all those places and then fill it in with the safety officer's name. You just fill in it in once, and it does it for all of them. So it just streamlines that whole process. A little bit more detail. It builds a static website. So basically, it's built. You can't have any fancy, interaction with it. But it's a page that you look at. But you can update it, of course, when you change the Markdown files. You can also download the website in PDF form. So for people that like to have it in a sort of hard copy on their desktop, shall we say, you can have it in PDF form. The documentation itself, using GitHub Actions, which is basically just a system that can do whatever you like when you put your documentation, your code onto GitHub. It can run some functions, and what it can do is build this static website, and you can look at the actual web pages on the GitHub pages. What's included as well in the Cookiecutter DCB0129 is that it automatically generates hazard labels via GitHub Actions. So here's an example of a placeholder. So Markdown uses very simple things just to help write your documentation, which is then converted into HTML. Having a hashtag here means this is a title. And the placeholders in Cookiecutter utilizes double curly brackets. And so when you run the Cookiecutter program, you say replace project name wherever it's seen within the curly brackets with whatever you're going to call the project name. And that's how the placeholders are used for this. So I've given this program a test run and utilized it, and actually taking some of the best of it for the digital clinical safety platform, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I just wanted to quickly go through, the pros and cons of the Cookiecutter version. It can automate a large amount of the documentation process, and it creates easy to access, open, and online documentation. So the cons of this, though, is that it requires basic, I would argue, but still some programming knowledge to set up and modify, even though it's just understanding how Git and GitHub works and how you can write your Markdown and then push it to GitHub. That's pretty much all you really need to know. And setup is via command line interface. You do need to be, comfortable using the terminal, the command line. Right. Hazards logging in code. This is the other thing that I've seen and discussed with my colleagues recently. And it's on the back of work that Joe, my former computer science student who was on placement with me and now working with Grant in Oxford, he did his dissertation on this. A fantastic dissertation. I read it in full yesterday. It's really, really, really good. Going through how we could use well, incorporate regulations straight into, the code along with security and stuff like that. So the title of this was DevSecRegOps, a bit of a mouthful, a framework for aiding security and compliance in modern healthcare software development, submitted last year. Joe did very well on passing that. I think he got a distinction, if I remember correctly. And so the DevSecRegOps is an abbreviation of development, security, regulations, which is where we're coming from with the clinical safety documentation, the regulations related to that, and operations framework. And it takes the standard DevOps, which people may be familiar with, which is sort of standardized way of building building software nowadays, which we still use and we do use in developing software for healthcare. But on top of that, it adds security testing and also healthcare regulations on it. And it's a bit of a mouthful saying DevSecRegOps, so I've abbreviated it for this talk, and who knows if I've coined a phrase of DevSro. We'll see. So DevSro overview. This is of Joe's work. So it was integrating regulatory compliance as part of the continuous integration, continuous deployment, the CI/CD workflow or pipeline, or whatever you like to call it. And it enables compliance to keep up with the fast pace of development seen with DevOps. And it obtains a collaborative and integration of software developers in the building of safer software for healthcare. You've got hazard logging in code, and we'll show you what that means in a minute. And hazards and the mitigations in code are version controlled via Git, which provides a robust audit trail. So this is how Joe has structured hazards in code for his dissertation. So this line here is just a function, and then we say there's a beginning of a hazard, there's an end of a hazard. All this in here is your hazard documentation. So it's documenting hazards and the mitigations, everything directly in code. And then this is a comment basically in the code. So the triple quotation marks at the top and the bottom mean this is all a comment. So a comment is basically text that's not utilized by the software to do things. It's basically for us humans to understand what's going on. Another program reads this comment, converts it into a table for you, and that's your documentation. That's your clinical safety documentation there. It's a fantastic idea, and I've built upon that with the platform that we're going to talk about. Now, the pros of this, there's loads, I think. Greater collaboration of software developers, operations, and security within the clinical safety team. There's an audit trail of hazards and how they directly mitigate in the code, or how they are directly mitigated in the code, and I would argue safer software as well. This is not something that's been used in anger yet with a live code in production, but I think it's a very, very powerful academic piece that we should build upon and utilize in NHS and worldwide even to actually try and implement safer code and safer digital systems for healthcare. Now, of course, every pro, there's a con. The code base, I feel, with the current layout, as set out by Joe in his dissertation, can become quite wordy if you put everything related to your hazards, the logging, the mitigations within the code itself. Code can already be quite lengthy to read without comments, so adding these hazards in there with extra details or too many details can make it quite difficult to read, look at, and so on. And if you put in code, hazards directly in code, the people that do the clinical side of things, the safety officers, then have to understand how to get into the code and read code. So there's a bit of training required there. And then also, because you're getting the software developers to actually incorporate hazard logging and clinical safety management in the code, you're going to have to get your software developers actually understanding clinical safety risk management. But for those two last points, I think actually those are short-term pains for long-term gains, because we would be building safer and better systems. Now, this is something else that I've discussed on Discourse, which some people may have sort of read about and interacted with. But when you have a hazard, I feel like there are types of hazards. And that got me thinking about, well, there's types of errors or exceptions in code. So, a bit of code's read by the computer and it causes an error. It can't compute, 6 divided by 0, for example, something like that. And you can get different kind of errors, and they're called exceptions in Python, which is my favorite programming language. All programming languages have exception types. And here's just 4 of many: key error, value error, memory error, runtime error, and so on. Now, I thought, why don't we have hazard types in code? So this is just a snippet of some test code I've written. The first line here is defining a function. And if you recognize the triple quotation marks there and the triple quotation marks there, we've got a comment, docstring for those of you in the know. But basically what you put in this docstring, which is just for us humans, you put in the arguments that you're going to have going into the function, so weight and height, and it returns a float. You even actually put in that docstring errors that could potentially come up, that you've written into the code that can come up. But why not have a hazards a parameter as well with some of these hazard typings? So that makes you wonder, what would be these hazard types? And I won't go through this in great detail, and I've broken these down into sort of sub types. But you could have patient demographics related, so wrong patient, wrong demographics, medication related, surgical. You could have observations, so wrong observation, wrong result, wrong interpretation, investigations related, referrer related, clinical interaction related, data, security, system related, end user related, alarm fatigue. This is my big bugbear, and the miscellaneous and so on. And I'll leave this more for the Q&A if people want to go through that, but it's just something to think about. Should we be having typing in code of hazards? Right. So the digital clinical safety platform. I presume this is why everyone's here. I want to hear about it, but I wanted to give you a backstory to how we got to this point of building the actual platform itself. Now, the digital clinical safety platform has been built, as Michelle has kindly pointed out, by those in the Alliance. And it combines pretty much everything we just discussed: the Cookiecutter DCB0129, the DevStro framework, and also the hazard typing. So an overview of it: it streamlines and automates safety documentation. It's easy to has an easy to use user interface. It uses templates and is adaptable to any safety standard, and it has an audit trail. And it has 2 components to it. Like I discussed with the Cookiecutter DCB0129, it creates static documentation sites, but it has a dynamic site where you can interact with it and change the values of the placeholders and other things like that, with a much nicer user interface than the sort of terminal that we saw with the original Cookiecutter. So, live demo time. I'm just going to have to change screens, so give me a sec. Fantastic. So here's a live demo. Hopefully it doesn't crash, but let's talk through it. So this is the landing page for the digital clinical safety platform. And here's 2 projects that we've got available to us. But I'm just going to walk through the work process, the flow that someone would do if they got a new project, and then go through a project I've made earlier about what it just showed. So click on New Project, and we can select, do we start a project from scratch, or we can import, a template for a project or previously built template project that's elsewhere. So let's say New Project, and we can give it a name. So test name, we can give it a description, some thing. We can make it private, public, or for members. So this is how people can view it from online. So if it's public, anyone can come and look at the documentation, the hard static web pages. And members is for if you've got people in a group. So we've got the clinicians who code group and another group down here. Or private is literally just to you as the assigned person that can see it. So I'm just going to make this public. We can select one group. We can add Dean as well, and then we can submit that. And this gives you an overview of what you built. You can say, yes, I like what I've done there. I'm going to go on to the next stage. You've successfully made this project, and you can start editing the documents. So this is where we use templating. So we got a DCB0129, and we got a 160 template as well. And that's basically markdown words that are pre-written to help you speed up the whole process. So let's take the 129, and we'll submit that. And then this takes you to the further along the dynamic page of the digital clinical safety platform. And do you remember, hopefully, I spoke about placeholders before, how you had the curly brackets, double curly brackets. Well, here's where you can actually add in, double the placeholders, the fillers for the placeholders that you had before. So I'm just going to throw in some bits and bobs, submit that, and that's now put those words into the placeholders. And if I want to change them, I can come back here and do them again. So this is the dynamic page. And then you can click View Published Documents, and this takes you to the static page. So these bits here, let me just expand that a bit. There we go. These bits here don't change, but you can go and look at all the bits that you want and so on. Look at all the wording and so on. And this is basically your final product that you would show to whoever, any regulatory or any trust or system that you're selling or implementing your system to. Now, that was a quick run through of just setting up. Now I'll take you through one I've made earlier. Now, just in terms of what you can do, I've already mentioned the placeholders, which you can change here. You can also edit the documents that you've already got. So you can choose one of your documents and you can just add text to it as you see fit, and it shows you what. So this is a markdown on the left. This is what it looks like, and on the right, it shows you what it looks like on a actual rendered web page, what it would look like. So you can add those things. I'm not going to save that. Leave. But what I want to do as well is that you can edit hazards. So you can, these are already 9 hazards in the system. You can click on it. You can edit them. In terms of you're probably all familiar with the likelihood and severity scoring. If you change the likelihood and the severity scoring, the risk scoring is automatically updated, so you don't have to manually calculate that each time. So that speeds that along as well. And there's other things you can actually have officer pages. It's not at the moment. You can have incidences. You have a compliance sign-off, which there's one there as well. This is based on the compliance sign-off that you have for the NHS England's DCB0129. So it's quite a lengthy lengthy web page and file, but then that is something you can actually submit as a final product. But one to take you to is the static pages and how that is interlinking everything as well. So here's all your documentation as before. Now here's your hazards. And you can click on them, and it will take you to your hazards. It will even have little logos here to tell you what the hazard is currently in different states. So log is something's been logged. New, it's a new hazard. There's your likelihood score. There's your severity score, and there's your risk score. All out there for you to quickly see. You can actually go through all this. And if you go to the bottom, there's hyperlinks to your code as well, where the hazard's logged. We'll talk about that in a sec. Now, if you go to hazard summary, this is a nice overview of all of your hazards. And you could, we haven't got that yet, but we could filter these. We could have the ones with the highest risk at the top or the bottom, the ones that need urgently fixing or whatever. But this is your overview of your hazards. You can click on them. There's your hazards again. You can actually go to that hazards page if you want and review it in its entirety. Now, let's go back to hazard 1. We go back to the bottom. What these hyperlinks are telling us is that there is some code that's been written and someone's put in a parameter of hazard and actually put in a hazard type and also a hazard number. So if we click on one of these, and hopefully you'll see this here, we had this before, defining the BMI. We've got the hazard here. We've got wrong patient and wrong demographics. And the numbers here, 1 and 2, relate to the hazard number, which we just looked at. And you can see just up here that it puts into this nice web page the hazards. It's taken the parameters, the return values, the exception errors, and it's put the hazards in here as well. And you can put any description you like, and then again, there's a hyperlink taking you back to the hazard. And that's just some of the functionality that we've got so far. Right, I'm just going to change what I'm presenting again. Just give me a sec. Fantastic. So I went through a lot there, but we can discuss further with the Q&A. But what I'm hoping this presents and this enables is bringing all the players into the same room, that dev-shrow framework. And I just wanted to hit home this point a bit again, because I think it's really important to actually talk about. Traditionally, the team that develop an app, the development team, created the said app, then they ship the app over to the operations team, who then in turn prepare the app for use in production. And this was very inefficient. There was a lot of throwing over the bureaucratic wall, back and forth, fixing the bugs and making the system production ready. Does it ring any bells that that's kind of going on with clinical safety? So DevOps, development and operations, as a team, people together, was born. And this was to stop this backwards and forwards of the system that you're building. And then, of course, security was added to it. So you do see people using this DevSecOps. But I think actually, as healthcare is tightly regulated, and regulation should be incorporated directly into the DevOps team alongside security. So coming back to Joe's work, the development security regulations operation framework, DevShrow, which I think we should look at adapting. So future features for the digital clinical safety platform. I've had a sit down with Dean, who will be talking in a sec about the platform, and he rightfully pointed out it would be nice to have some graphical functionality in there to actually do some process mapping and put it in there, and then link hazards and logging and all sorts of different wonderful ways to actually improve how people utilize this program, and in terms of documenting and how they use it in their daily life as well. And also anything else that might be brought up in the Q&A section later. This is just here for the computer nerds that are on the call and anyone watching this later. But the full stack, so I mentioned there's a statics page, there's a dynamic side page. We've got some bits and bobs here that makes everything work. Django backend, the static files, which you see for the actual documentation, and there's also a database, PostgreSQL. SQL. Full stacks here, if anyone wants to go through it. It's basically all the different layers of technology that's utilized. CI/CD, so the continuous integration, the continuous deployment pipeline, all the bits and bobs are here, but I won't go through this because it is quite nerdy. Right, well, I've finished a few minutes early. Fantastic. So, Michelle and Dean, over to you.
So over to Dean now, who's going to feedback on how he's found using this software in clinical safety. So over to you, Dean.
Thank you, Michelle. Hi, I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Mark, for your demonstration. I think I want to firstly pick up on the point, Mark, you were making around there's a key part there around coding and the importance of raising those hazards at that point. We have this handover, don't we, where development hand over to operational team, and then it's almost this sort of the risk assessment begins at that point once we've done coding. in certain circumstances, not all circumstances for organisations. However, by introducing the platform and its functionality, we come back to, and I've scribbled it down, safety by design, because this is what it's all about. It's being able to add those hazards at that point. So Mark kindly gave me access to the platform and walked me through. So I took it under my wing and sort of took a typical project and used the functionality. I think it's a great starting point. It is an MVP, and as Mark said, we're at that point where it's open source as well. So for those of you out there, you can access it and you can go and have a play yourselves and see what you think. So from my perspective, easy to use, as you've seen Mark giving his demonstration. So to be able to set up a project, and I think it's key for me as well. So it's multiple projects within any organisation. You're working on multiple clinical risk management projects at any given time, and within those projects you'll have numerous hazards, and some of those hazards as well will intersect across other projects. You'll have commonality in relation to that, and I think one of my observations as well is the categorization of hazards within projects as well. Really useful to be able to do that. I know we can do that on Excel spreadsheets, but we want to try and get away from that. We're in the age of digital, aren't we? And we're still using Word documents and Excel spreadsheets to create our work. Talking to Michelle earlier before we started the call, and yes, you can have some nice filters on Excel spreadsheets, etc. But how much nicer it will be to have a platform where you can actually sort of filter down within the platform itself. You know, show me all the hazards that relate to this category and to that category, and as Mark has demonstrated to you as well, that we can actually drill down to say, okay, for those of us that are working in the 129 space and are coding, and actually now these days it's not just those suppliers out there that are working in the 129 space. It is health organisations as well, as you can see, because this is where this platform was born from. You know, supported by Oxford University hospitals as well, and some support in there. That we're actually coding at the health organisation level. So it's absolutely key that we can identify hazards at that level. The management of hazards and hazard identification, you can see from the platform as well, utilising the tools and the functionality within there, that you can create your documentation templates and your data sets, so that where you do need, you've got certain areas within safety documentation that are repeatable, okay, and you don't want to spend all of your time just constantly repeating to produce your documents in verbose Word documents, Excel spreadsheets. It would be really nice to come to a project where you've got a baseline hazard log, or you've got a library of hazards that you can utilize. You know, Mark was talking about sort of like roadmap, what's next for the platform, and it would be really nice to see some features in there. We'd already spoken about process mapping. Business process mapping, as we know, is key to hazard identification when we're looking at scope definition. And Mark's already said that, you know, very doable for us to add some sort of, you know, video-based functionality within there, but take it to the next level. You know, Mark's already demonstrated to you around linking the hazards within coding. We'll be able to then link those hazards within the process maps themselves. So we can do that from the starting point within any given project, and key around the use of templates as well, and being able to, so not only does this help you manage your projects at a system level. But what it allows you to do as an organisation as well, I know Mark didn't go into too much detail around that, but your clinical risk management system as well. So where you've got your placeholders and where you're creating the core information that relates to your organisation, and that can also be a driver for other initiatives within your organisation. So if you're aligning with quality management systems and other policies and procedures, why not introduce those within the platform as well? And I'm sure that could be something for discussion further down the line with the guys within the alliance. And I think what it also raises is, so you've got the core functionality, you've got this really good platform, but what it brings together is that team. As Mark alluded to before, we've got all these different handovers, but what I see is this brings the developers into the forefront, because it's absolutely crucial that that's where our clinical risk management starts in relation to the development of digital health systems, and it gets them engaged. Now, one of Mark's cons on his slide set was around the awareness. If you're going to get these people engaged, then they have to have an amount of clinical risk management knowledge. For me, that's a pro, okay, because it's everybody's business, clinical risk management, whether you're at the start of the process or at the end of the process. Everybody needs to know, everybody has to have awareness within their organisation and needs to know what their role is in relation to that. And the introduction of something like this platform, I think can only benefit that, because it needs involvement from everybody within the different teams and the different roles within an organisation. So it's a good opportunity to be able to do that. And it's an easy to use platform. At the moment, there's no whistles and bells. It's really, as you've seen from what Mark's shown you, it's a basic platform, but it does what it says on the tin. So to get people engaged, I don't think that's going to be a very arduous process. So it would be really great to see some people out there take on that challenge, want to take it on board and embrace it, and use it as a prototype, so that we can get feedback as a team, Mark and his team and the Alliance can get feedback, and we can move this forward with your support. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dean. We'd now like to open the channel to your Q&A. There, if you could put your questions in the comments section, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen, then we will very happily answer any questions you have. To add your comments, you need to align your YouTube channel with your Gmail account. So as you press add a comment, you should be able to follow the instructions on the screen. If you don't have a YouTube channel, if you just hover over the icon, which is your name, you can quickly add a channel, and then it'll allow you to add some comments. I hope that all makes sense. So have we got any questions? So I've got a question for Dean. When you have your causes, often the different causes have different risks initially. So is there anywhere digitally where you could record your sort of work in process? So you might have 4 causes, and each of them, one might have virtually no risk, and another cause might have a really high risk for that hazard. So is there anywhere you can record how each cause is being managed, which wouldn't appear on the final document? It would just be your working notes. So your hazard could have a high score, but that's because one of the causes is actually high risk and needs to be mitigated through testing or whatever. So is there a space you can record that so you're not having to make extra notes?
Yeah, I mean, there's causes within that you can record within the platform, and you can link in your notes within there, or it can be put straight into the code in relation to that. So you've got a direct link in with the code. I think causes a transient mark across hazards as well. So there's no reason why you couldn't have those causes sort of link into other hazards.
Okay.
Marks. There we go. Yes.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly go through this. So this is the dynamic side of the platform where you can update a hazard. You can create new ones, of course, as well. And this is based on Marcus Bohr's templating that he used, but you can change it to however you want it to look. It's all created from a markdown file to then converted into a dynamic page with all these different fields. You know, there's the risks, the severity, the likelihood, the description, and there's a causes section as well. So you can write bits in there. You can add in your hazards, your harm, existing controls, assignments, and so on. And you can add extra fields if you feel that is needed. It's very adaptable, and you don't need to know any code. You just need to understand how to use Markdown. Everything is based on Markdown. Once you get your head around that, and it's really simple. Honestly, it's really simple. Basically, each label, so a label is a bit of text that's connected to an input field. Each label is just a hashtag title in the Markdown. As simple as that. You know, we can make this adaptable as possible. And yes, causes are in there, and a whole lot of other things. And you can add and remove and have your own template for your own organization if you wish.
I think there is no, picking up on your point, Michelle, around sort of like, you know, the associated risk within a particular cause. There's potentially some work that possibly needs to be done to associate a risk score with specific causes in relation to a hazard or a hazardous situation. If we're going to look at sort of, you know, getting the realms of 14971 medical device, FMEA, and that type of sort of approach as well. But I think the main concentration at the moment is around sort of obviously that DCB0129 flow at present.
And then I have a question from Vicky, which is, can you reuse hazards and controls across multiple projects? I don't know who's best to answer that.
I can have a go at that if that's right. So the short answer is yes. Now, the longer answer is it comes back to your templates and your Markdown files. So if you, and I'm not sure if you're wanting to say reuse hazards across projects, because that's kind of so projects are sort of a containerized box, shall we say, of all the files and other things you would put in there. But let's say you have this kind of hazard that appears all the time, and you want to just say add this hazard with all the different contexts and attributes associated with that. At the moment, there isn't a reusable hazard with pre-filled bits attribute that you can sort of use, a template. There's just the sort of empty hazard template as itself, not pre-filled. But could you have that, and could we add that? Yes. In sort of the longer answer, yes.
And I wondered if she actually meant causes of hazards. So you could have a cause that there could be a fault in the messaging system. And if you're using a certain messaging system, that hazard remains the same throughout, and the mitigation's the same, and the evidence you're going to look for is the same. So, you know, in Excel spreadsheets, you cut and paste, don't you? You find an old project Excel spreadsheet and you just cut and paste it in rather than retyping it all. So I think that might be what Vicky's talking about as well. Can you just, like, you know what you've got to do, and it's just a matter of documenting it.
I mean,
I think there's lots of opportunities for a need, isn't there, for many, not just hazards, as you said, Michelle. You know, it could be causes and the related information. It could be hazards, because as we know, hazards are common across many projects. There's about eight or nine, probably sort of tens of hazards that are common for any digital health system that you need to introduce. So it's a good starting point, maybe something to think about for us, Mark, to create that baseline project for any given digital health system that can be used in relation to projects.
And this copy and paste in spreadsheets worries me. I know it's what we all do, but actually you might be copying across on a spreadsheet stuff that doesn't make sense, or stuff that's even sort of, in a sense, dangerous to copy across, that forgets to bring across or add some extra danger or something, a mitigation process you put in place as well. So I think you have to be very careful how you implement it in the digital clinical safety platform, this copy and paste like functionality. And there should be somehow a standardized way that you shouldn't have too many elements copied across for this templated hazard that you can copy across, because you know, there is a thought process in this. There is your clinical knowledge that you have to apply, and you know, your digital system knowledge that you have to apply to make sure that hazard that you may copy and paste is applicable in this case.
And I suppose also you must never copy and paste the risk analysis, because it will be different for each project depending on what the project is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's something I think we'd have to really think about, isn't it, before we introduce it, because it in itself has to be safe. It's becoming proper things. Any other questions from anyone? Dean, is there anything you've come across that you think might enhance the service, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Mark said, we'd sort of, you know, once I'd used the platform, we were looking at sort of, you know, what's next, and you know, as I mentioned, I think the sort of, you know, process mapping, and it would be, I know we're at that stage at the moment of MVP, and I think anyone that's taken on board would probably like to see some sort of, you know, some conditional logic in there in relation to the platform. Or I think it would be a really useful tool if you have that sort of like being able to search for and audit the information. So you might have numerous projects that you've entered into the platform. However, you then want to do some trending in relation to clinical risk across a number of platforms, and you might want to look at risk profiles, and that lends itself then to, you know, sort of looking at sort of the organisation and how you then can manage that. It could influence training, further design, business process changes, looking at, because as we know, this is it's continuous. You know, we don't just risk assess or do our clinical risk management work and then just tick a box and walk away. Unfortunately, that does happen in certain circumstances. However, it's about continuous improvement. But I'm sure with sort of, you know, if it gets adopted and it gets used in anger, it gives us the opportunity to be able to develop it further.
And another question, can you link projects? So sometimes you have a project and then you have another project that's actually using that first project as part of its project. So you need to link in the clinical safety software from the other project, you know, so that you can show the end-to-end project is safe and the individual components within the bigger project are safe. Is there a way of doing that, or do you just cross-reference the static PDF, or how would you cross-reference?
I think that might need a bit of a thought process to figure out how you hyperlink or however you want it to work on the static sites between projects. But of course, when I was showing the building of a new project from scratch, you can actually also import a project. But that's more of a copy and paste and change it as you need to element, rather than here's a project, here's another project, they're somehow interlinked, or maybe part of a bigger project somehow. big project and smaller projects trickling down from that one project, which, you know, EPR implementation is very much like that. So I fully appreciate that might be kind of the standard workload for people. As it stands, I have not built that into the digital clinical safety platform. Not to say that it can't be done. We would just have to, you know, decide, is that an important feature? And thinking about it now, and that's why we're having this webinar, to sort of raise these questions. Thinking about it now, I think it probably is. But we would have to think about how you link them from the sort of the code level, but that's not for everyone else to worry about. And how would you, you know, visually see that on the front end, and how would you search and trickle through those projects as well? But, you know, that's a very possible functionality to add if that's something that people would like to have.
I mean, the thing about this whole project is it's an opportunity for those who've got an interest in the space to jump on board and contribute and shape the future development. As Michelle said in the introduction, this has been a passion project, mostly Mark, with some contributions from myself, Marcus, and Joe, because each of us in our own way have an itch to scratch in this space. And given how the interest and the attendees we have here, clearly there's other people's with this itch to scratch. And in the sense, this what we're inviting everyone here is, if you've got this itch and you want to join with us to shape the project, we'd be very keen to have your enthusiasm, contributions, and ideally, if for some of you on the call, maybe some money to contribute to, because I said, we're doing this out of the spare bits of either our own personal time or within gaps and spaces within our day jobs. But if this is something of interest of folks, to have something that's a piece of software that's open and free and for the good of the NHS, we'd be very delighted to have you on board.
So I don't know how many people have questions that they couldn't access the comments section. It is slightly tricky because you need a Gmail address and a linked YouTube channel to be able to get in. But we are very happy to answer your questions by using the email address displayed on this slide, which I've also popped into the chat. So if you do have questions and you can't get them onto this forum, then, or any suggestions you'd like to have about future forums and presentations, please do get in touch with us at the address shown on the slide, which I've also popped into the chat. Is there any more questions or anything anyone else would like to say?
I was wondering if I could do a recap of the system, actually, if that's all right.
I think that would be brilliant if everyone's
Yes.
happy. We've got 7 minutes left, so that would be fantastic.
Yes, I prepared a slide for it, of course. So we went through quite a lot over this webinar, sort of the current practices and sort of the other ways of doing things and how we've integrated that all into this digital clinical safety platform. And of course, it's a minimal viable product, MVP, but what we're trying to achieve with that, and I think that's very possible that we will do, is a streamlined and automated clinical safety documentation process, which uses a user-friendly interface, uses these markdown templates, which makes it much easier for the end user to use, but technically they don't have to get too bogged down with those details, but that's very easy to teach. It's adaptable to any safety standard because you're using markdown templates and you just bring them in from, you know, wherever you put them on GitHub, for example, or they can be stored on the platform itself. And you just then, you know, you have your starting point, all the bits that are standard between projects is already written in there for you, and just fill in the placeholders and add extra text where and when you need it. And actually having safety built in at the code level with the development, security, regulation, operations, the DevStro framework. I think it's something I think will be very powerful if we can get that adapted in healthcare. And because you're using Git, GitHub, or whatever Git repository you want to use, like GitLab, Gitbucket, and all the other ones, with Git, you've got version control, like you have on Word documents. Word documents nowadays do have version control in there, but this is actually showing where you have logged a hazard in the code and outside the code with the markdown files, which then creates your static site, along with the mitigations you've written into the code itself, all in the same place where you can see cause and effect all in the code. And I think it just provides a very powerful process if we can actually combine all those 4 different things: development, regulation, security, and operations, all in one go. But having everything as well, version control with Git, I think is very powerful as well.
Thank you, Mark. And I think one of the other things is standardizing how we document clinical safety is fantastic. Having had to review lots and lots of products and clinical safety cases, it would be really good to know where you can find things in each safety case. And I think this would really help. And people are able to compare safety cases and see where their project fits. I think this could give a wealth of information. And as Dean says, if you can start looking at the safety profile across the organisation, because all the safety documentation is kept in the same way, and it's easy to compare one system to another, then I think this could improve the clinical safety of all the NHS. Actually, I think this is a fantastic project. So we've got 4 minutes left. If there are no further questions, I think we can finish a couple of minutes early. I'd just like to draw your attention to the last slide, which has our email address on it. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask us and they couldn't ask it in the chat, then do please email us and we'll be very happy to answer your questions, or any support you wish to offer, or if you know of any funding streams that might help us, please do get in touch with us. That would be gratefully received, and any engagement, anyone who wants to be involved, we would very much welcome it. So I think we'll close there, and thank you all for joining, and I hope you like what we're doing and that you will be able to engage and support us. Thank you.